what's the definition of virtual reality? I think virtual reality really is the creation and simulation of environments that you can interact with and experience. Virtual reality is simply the next way that we are going to tell stories that take it a whole step beyond film and photos and traditional storytelling methods.
Yeah, they have games in the Steam store that you can fly spaceships and look around like this out of your cockpit and like you're actually there, which is amazing. But you're talking about spherical video.
Right.
You can only like look around from a central nodal point.
Everything, whether again it's the simplest commercial or film or game, it's all moving towards interactivity. So virtual reality again is something it exists right now where there's limited amounts. Some experiences where you can simply look around in a 360-degree space, and others where you can walk around and interact with your environment.
And now we have smart devices in all of our pockets where you have accelerometers and a high-definition screen that you can download a free app, something like Little Star, for example, or Facebook spherical content or YouTube spherical content, and actually stream live, push a button, and hold it and experience with any smartphone.
Think about that. Virtual reality is here for free for the masses, and I think that's what it took, for technology to get to the point where now already you have it in your pocket, the way to experience virtual reality.
Hello everyone, my name is Doug, live from B&H. Welcome to the panel. What you just saw was a glimpse of a perspectives video we shot with 8112 Studios. The full clip is online. We have, of course, with us here today, Doug Saunders from that studio. He and a few other panelists are going to talk about VR. VR is everywhere. I see it everywhere I turn, and by that I mean, of course, every website I read. So we have a social media tag. You can follow us, BH Photo Live. If you want, pitch us any questions. We'll be answering them later in the panel. And if we don't get to them, don't fret. We'll be answering the team at B&H will be answering them later on. So let's begin. We have experts here to tell us everything I don't know. So first up is Alex Chechelnitsky with Concept VR. Concept VR, of course, they produce 360 and VR content, backing it up with 4 years of experience in not just creating the content, but also the rigs. Next up is Ben Nunez, the president of Little Star, a distribution platform for 360 and VR content. Little Star features a wide variety of content from creators all over the world, including some featured on this very panel. Third is Doug Saunders. He was the one you saw in the video, who was from 8112 Studios. He's the co-founder, which is an award-winning production company specializing in VR productions for a number of high-profile companies. And last but not least, we have PJ Morelli from, he's the head of production, Uvisit Studios, a company who utilizes VR technology to bring you to exciting places, all in immersive 360 degrees. All right, so for our first chapter, 360 versus VR. This is the first part. We have to establish some terms. So we have 360-degree video, we have virtual reality, and there's even augmented reality, or AR, which is a third bit. We'll talk about that a little bit. So I want, by the way, sorry, let me establish first, thank you, Cinema 5D, making this possible. They are our sponsors for the first two segments. And I think I want Ben to answer this first question. So establish some terms for us. What is the difference between 360, VR, and AR?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I think what we're seeing is these terms getting tossed around a lot. 360 video, virtual reality, spherical video, augmented reality. And the reality is that 360 video is simply a video served up as an MP4, streamed out to devices using a camera that is an inside-out capture that creates spherical content that can be viewed on a mobile device, on the web, on a new Apple TV using the Little Star app, for example, as well as in a virtual reality headset. So there are quote-unquote VR experiences, or what is also being called VR video, where it's just simply 360 video inside of a VR headset. When you get into a VR headset, there's certainly a lot more that we can do with you using things like positional tracking, using the outside cameras that allow you to physically walk around in space. There's a lot of interactive content, either sort of choose your own adventure or changing camera angles, or even full-fledged games that lets you use your eyes or your head tracking or controllers to sort of interact with content. And then certainly when you sort of implement social shared experiences, companies like AltSpace allow you to share content together, share experiences together. So there's really a wide spectrum of how 360 video can be used across devices in VR headsets, but then sort of fully interactive and immersive VR in headsets as well.
Great. So this is a whole new medium. And I think we're all familiar with the phrase, the medium is the message. So PJ, I know you have some experience with the history of this. Could you give us kind of a history of 360 and VR, because it almost appears as if VR has taken us overnight. This is huge success, but everything has some background to it. Nothing's really overnight. So what is the history of 360 and VR to where we are today, and what does that allow us to do now?
Sure. As far as the history goes, I think this latest sort of big wave and resurgence in VR, because as you mentioned, VR is not new. This didn't happen overnight. This really happened with the proliferation of handheld devices, phones, and really the iPhone, if you really want to break it down. It's smaller, more powerful components that you're able to package together, and that can perform really high intensity work in a very small package. And so you're able to get a lot of data, a large image, and actually be able to deliver that in a very small device that you can theoretically carry around in your pocket. And I know a lot of us do that regularly. As far as what it does for us and what it unlocks as a, both as a creator and the consumer, as a creator or director, you've unlocked a whole new level of control in what you can deliver to your viewer. In traditional film and media, you're framing for the rectangle, and while you can control everything inside of that rectangle, you can't necessarily control all the other external influences in the room or whatever. Well, when you put in a VR headset, you are completely isolated. You are a captive audience, and so as a creator, it allows you to have so much more control over what's being delivered to your consumer. And on the consumer side, they've unlocked a new method of control on how they consume that experience by, picking on the most basic level, picking what their frame of view is, all the way up to using haptics and all sorts of controllers and all sorts of fun stuff that's hopefully in the near future.
All right. So then I guess that really begs the question, what kind of stories are we trying to tell, or can we tell? What should we tell? Alex, would you want to answer that?
Yes. Well, as a filmmaker, from our perspective at Concept VR, we try to create stories that will somehow emotionally will affect the viewer. Whether that emotion is happiness, somebody getting scared, somebody's feeling for what's happening in the content. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, and this medium can do that like no other medium, because if it's shot properly, if you can convey to the viewer that they are really present, and the presence of VR comes into play, then and using the 360 environment to our advantage, that's the videos we want to create. We want to create something that's entertaining and something that conveys presence to the full extent.
And I mean, at Little Star, we see just about every piece of content that's getting created for this medium, and we're seeing a lot of news content, a lot of documentaries, everything shot on, everything from a Ricoh Theta on up into, big cinematic rigs. A lot of sports content, music content. Horror is a genre, as Alex was talking about, with fear, that has a unique ability. We joke that, VR might actually scare someone to death. And that might actually happen one day. So there's, the animated content and game engine content is another big category that we're seeing. So there's a lot of creative outlets for VR.
So that brings us gaming content, VR content as opposed to 360. The viewing space for these, one of the most common is the mobile headset or phone-powered headset. So we have 360 in there. Would we at some point be able to get true VR content on those headsets? Is the power not there yet, and if not, will it be soon? Will it be there maybe in the next 2 years, 3 years? Doug, what do you think about that option?
Well, I mean, you think about where we were coming from. Back in the 90s, we had early VR in arcades, which were based on CRT monitors with the slow refresh rate, and they're extremely heavy. And what happens is when a screen has a low refresh rate, it kind of gives you this drunk feeling where there's a delay, and it makes you sick. And so people were initially excited, but it just wasn't there. But now, with what Oculus did early on, where they hacked cell phone screens, we have a quick refresh screens that, thanks to the iPhone, like you were saying, and a processing power that's more powerful than what I grew up with. I mean, it's amazing. But you're thinking about true gaming immersion, like we have with an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive type platform. It's going to take a little bit, because literally they're having to re-engineer the screens on these phones. Now, the Retina screens you see on your iPhone looks amazing to you right here, but you put it here with a couple of VR goggle magnifying glasses and you see every pixel. So they're having to re-engineer 4K screens. There's a limited field of view. It's like 90 degrees on a standard iPhone or Samsung, which is fine, but you compare it to the Oculus and HTC headsets, it's 20 to 30 degrees more field of view, and they're higher res. And they're going to need to be way more powerful. Eventually, absolutely, I think it's going there, but I think we have a few years where we need more powerful, wider field of view screens on cell phones and a heck of a lot more processing power to really power those game engine systems.
I mean, up to this point, most of the headsets, the mobile headsets that we see, are engineered to fit the device. And I think now we're starting to see that happen in the other direction, where the devices themselves, the phones and the mobile devices, are going to be engineered specifically to be able to be capable to do the things that we wanted to do, hopefully in the next few years, the positional tracking and all of the other fun stuff.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing phones, the approach Doug was just talking about with the Samsung Gear VR and others, and even in Google Cardboard, where you're just putting the phone right in front of your face. LG came out with a headset. There's a rumor that Google's headset, which will come out, they'll probably announce at I/O next week, will be a headset that is powered, has the displays in the headset, but you can actually keep your phone in your pocket, and there's a wire that just connects that up. So we're not taking a 4K, we're not taking a 2K screen or a 1K screen and just putting it in front of our face with magnifying glasses.
I mean, the fact that we're there now is already a testament to just how far this technology has come from, as you're saying, the 90s. So that brings us kind of to the next point, though, is that VR is already everywhere. 360 is already everywhere. It's available on so many platforms. We have two here with us today. We have Little Star and UVisit. But you can even go to YouTube, Facebook, and there is VR content. There's 360 content. How does platform play into the experience? So I guess that means both desktop and mobile.
Yeah, I mean, I think the platform plays a huge role in delivering a good experience to the consumer. I mean, we're still in this infancy level of real adoption. So the first experience is so crucial in getting people to really understand what VR is all about and how powerful it can be. And if a platform doesn't deliver a good, smooth, enjoyable first experience, it's going to set us back a little bit. And so I think delivering the platform, having a platform that delivers content in a smooth, efficient, and enjoyable manner is crucially important.
Yeah, we really see it as device agnostic too. I mean, at Little Star, we're about getting this content out across every device: iOS, Android, the web, even the Apple TV, and then every major headset from the Gear VR, the Rift, the Vive, and the PlayStation VR as well. So we're pretty excited about sort of getting that immersive content. Facebook is just a feed. YouTube is YouTube. And then each of these headsets are sort of their own platform in their own way.
And if I may, because this is based on a discussion you and I have had before this today, the really important thing is from the brand side, we have brands that have come to us and say, we want to build our own app. Hey, listen, if somebody wants to hire me to help them build a bespoke app, great. But the truth is, you think about the World Wide Web, 15 years ago, it was like, I had a GeoCities web page. Everybody, like your uncle, had your cockamamie, conspiracy theory website and all sorts of wild stuff. But now, today, you wake up in the morning, what do? You go to 5 to 10 websites, right? The average consumer, they're excited about VR, of course, but are they gonna, in the end, it's like easy integration. A site like, Little Star, for example, where you can kind of go there and have a whole bunch of content from from Nat Geo to Acura to Lexus to whatever, versus like having to go to a single app to go to a single branded experience. It's integration into pre-existing platforms, I think, is very important, as opposed to honestly creating bespoke apps. I mean, there's a place there, but that's where it's going.
Yeah, and it's great for clients to be able, because we also do a lot of client work, and a lot of our clients come in and tell us, hey, in the future we would like to have an app, of course, because the more content we produce, but now we want to be on Little Star because Little Star is on Apple TV and Little Star is accessible in Gear VR. We don't have to go further. Our clients and everybody is familiar with Little Star or any other platform, so it's definitely a big plus.
All right, so let's move on to production because, since we have these platforms, since VR is everywhere, we want to talk a little bit about how to make that kind of content. NAB was almost a month ago already, and our team was there to see basically everything. And we saw VR 360 rigs everywhere. I can tell you, you all know this. There were demos, rigs, panels. So before we continue, we have a little summary of what went down at NAB.
Every year, buzzwords fill the air at NAB, and there's always something that stands out. This year, VR and 360-degree gear were everywhere, and not only was the gear on display, but storytellers and engineers alike were eager to get the word out and showed us just what the future looks like. Look at this space, cameras and rigs everywhere. Walking through the NAB show floor can be hard work, so we did it for you. Like the rest of NAB, here we have some of the most exciting innovative gear. Here's the Aura 4i live VR camera, designed for high-resolution real-time video stitching, which launches exclusively from B&H. And check out this rig from 360 Heroes that combines up to 7 Blackmagic Micro Cinema cameras. Here we have the Move rig from Mover, which utilizes Canon mirrorless cameras and custom lenses in one kit. This one's a beast. Think Tank Team's Project Beyond combines 16 cameras on the sides and 1 camera on top to create truly stereoscopic 360-degree video with software that knits the 35-megapixel image in real time. And GoPro makes a splash, as always, with its Omni rig. Combining 6 individual Hero 4 Black cameras, the Omni can record immense 8K 360 video with pixel-level camera syncing. Speaking of sync, Timecode Systems SyncBack Pro is designed to provide professional timecode on a GoPro Hero 4 and can even sync multiple units wirelessly. Lastly, as part of our live studio stream, B&H was proud to show some of the latest in VR tech and 360 filmmaking. Who knows? Maybe one day people could learn in a virtual environment just like this. And now, back to our panel.
And we're back. So let's continue. Alex, your company, of course, has experience in creating content, but you're also involved in making rigs. So you know the tools that filmmakers use and how they can create better content. What can you share about designing a 360 rig?
Yeah, so we are positioned in a very interesting place in the business. Besides the fact that Concept VR creates a lot of content and has been creating content for many years for a lot of big brands, we also create the rigs for the professionals. I like to call it, by professionals for professionals. These rigs basically were created from a need to shoot something on location. And then we saw a lot of our friends and contacts just found the same need. They found a need for somewhat that's available on the market, that it can put in a specific geometric array to be able to shoot these experiences. And this is really how Freedom 360 came together, as a product company, because there was a need for 360 rigs. And what differentiates us from different rig manufacturers is that we always work on them. There's never a moment where the rig is done, it's good, and that's it, it sells. We go on location, we shoot in all kinds of different situations. Recently, we shot a rocket launch from 200 feet away. I mean, it's a very hectic situation. We needed to adapt our rig so it doesn't melt, and we actually get the footage from it, which we succeeded to do. So, it's a constant, it's a constant evolution of the rig. What can we do? How can we make it better? And most importantly, how can we provide something for the professionals in the industry? Because a lot of companies, a lot of hardware companies don't really manufacture specific rigs or equipment for shooting and capturing 360 video. So we took it on ourselves, and we have a lot of stuff that we manufacture, and a lot of professionals use at the moment in the industry.
Okay, good. I mean, that's your experience with it. First off, did the cameras not melt?
No, they didn't. No, we have the footage to prove it.
Oh, okay. Well, I would hope so.
And it's on Little Star, by the way.
So adding to that, what VR, every new technology, it adds up, and that's really no surprise. But what kind of technological advances can we expect to possibly bring down the cost of 360 video and VR in general? And that not just applies to rigs, but also the production end. Are we seeing tools that make this a slightly easier process, slightly more something that people can jump right into?
Absolutely, and that's something we are doing in the community as well. A big part of producing these 360 videos is post-production, as we all know, and fear at some point.
Yeah.
And so we work with a lot of software companies, such as The Foundry, such as Mocha. And we help them to create these tools so us and other professionals can go in and not break their brain. How do I do this or how do I do that? And because in regular film and regular cinema, we have so many tools right now available to us that it's a no-brainer of how do I shoot a time lapse, or how do I create titles, or how do I create captions. And this is something that's quite difficult in a way, because we need to go on an extra step to do that in VR. So like I said, we are working with a lot of companies right now. We give them footage. We have a big bank of footage that we accumulated over the years, and we try to help them, but also help the industry to create better content and more immersive content.
I think one of our challenges right now is the lack of standards. There are no real centralized sets of rules when it comes to creating content. Now, that's a great thing, and it's also an incredibly daunting thing. It's kind of the Wild West in a lot of ways still. You can create rules that you use, but they may not be the same rules that other platforms are using and other headsets are going to use. So, it's the more specialized tool sets and standards that start to get solidified. I think we're going to see better, more polished, and more more content that can be used in a wider variety of applications. But that doesn't exactly exist. There is no spherical video format. It's MP4.
And the truth is, it's like you could, Alex, I've used your camera in a variety of times.
Thank you.
And there's other cameras we've used for other applications and situations, and it's tough. You're right. There's no specific way where you can just go I'm going to buy the new Canon cinema camera or new Red Epic, and I'll have the best camera, and that's that. You have to not only buy a quality camera system or build or shoot with a certain system, and then completely understand not only stitching, but rotoscoping, motion tracking, nuke, is a whole different set of issues that follow, sound mixing, everything. It's like a whole different thing. And like you said, there's no standardized system. And the truth is, the way of parallax, you're shooting in a tight environment, you have to understand about, and it's a whole different discussion for a whole nother podcast, but understanding parallax and how to mask out is just, it's going to be easier in 6 months maybe.
And there is no simple shot. So, for example, in regular cinema, we know that if we have an interview, there's a certain setup for an interview. You go in, you shoot it, you get your footage, and you work on it. In VR, there's no, it's just this simple shot.
It's a mid shot. There's no
simple shots because there's always something. You always have to be aware of your environment. You always have to be aware of what's happening all over the place, because if you see the camera sees you, you're in the shot, and the level of immersion disappears.
Alex, just cut to B-roll.
we
kidding, everybody.
We all try to do that, don't we? The that causes so many issues though, because you have so many more things to consider. And you have, like you were saying, you have the audio, you have the blocking of it, you have pretty much every part of filmmaking that already exists. Now you've multiplied its difficulty. But give us some examples of how that is in the field. What kind of challenges do you face when creating 360 content in terms of the lighting, in terms of the blocking, or the composition? How does that change?
Sure, I'll take that one. You really think about, I work on more in the, I know you guys too. We all work in advertising side of things. And it's, you want to take another direction, explain to brands you can't just cut to B-roll. That's one thing. Brand, half the time, I don't know about you guys, but half of what I do, and I'm happy to do so, I'm not complaining, is brand education.
Yes.
Is actually, I'm shooting a lot
100%.
less, and I'm doing brand education just so they understand. They're excited about it, but they don't understand like the process that's different. And then, you know, treating the camera a certain way. It's less about understanding the human reaction to the camera. You know, you don't want to treat it like a B-roll camera where, oh, it's on a car and we're going through a place. You know, what's your story? You know, treat the camera like a person. Heavy vibrations cause, you know, certain warping issues. You know, parallax, keeping the camera too close to somebody where you may stitch together incorrectly if they're within a certain field of view. Also, we shoot with, unless you shoot a certain way, it's tough to shoot with artificial lighting. If you're shooting a studio environment, you know, if you're shooting a studio, you could shoot with front cameras, have cameras behind and not film in the back, and then shoot a plate for the back and then stitch the two scenes together. But you have to be tricky if you're gonna have lights. We shot an ad campaign where a client insisted we budget for a grip truck. And, you know, if the client demands it, absolutely. On our normal TV ads, we would. We pulled one sandbag and one bounce card from that thing, and that was it. So, yeah, I mean, think ahead, I guess. Plan strategically.
Yeah, and we get that a lot. Actually, we come into a production with a little car and everything we need in the trunk, and the question is always, where's the rest of you guys? Where's everything?
Yeah. PJ, can you add a little bit to the production woes?
Absolutely. We'd be here all night. I guess one of the initial challenges is just trying to figure out how to direct. Where do you put your crew? We were talking about this a little bit before. We've all gotten pretty good at disguising ourselves.
Hiding in bushes.
Yes, hiding in bushes behind a rock. We're being, you know, the extra who's, you know, just kind of floating around so you can keep an eye on what's going on in the scene, but let it happen. You can't direct from a traditional sense. You can, and there are ways to do it. It requires a little bit more hardware, a few extra people, and some extra dollars. But it's a whole new layer of thinking about, you know, the way to prepare your set and your scene.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of the best content we're seeing is content that doesn't make you have to look around. I think 360 is great, but how many times? Every time we put somebody in a headset, they sort of do this for the first, 30 to 60 seconds of whatever piece of content that they're looking at. And if the director has done a good job, they've kept most of the action occurring within sort of the human peripheral vision of roughly 210 degrees, so that, unless the swivel chair market takes off, we're all sitting in pretty fixed chairs or on a couch or in your bed, just sort of laying there and looking at content. We don't want to work for it too hard.
So that kind of brings a good point, though, because if somebody's wandering around, rotating their head in looking for material that may not even be there, does that cause motion sickness or anything? Does that increase some kind of risk for that in the experience? And if so, I mean, this might answer the question, but do you have to take care of that at the production end, or is this something that's handled more in the headset end?
Both.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, from a production standpoint, when you're creating this content, horizon control, how you cut, whether you're cutting vertical down, that sort of often makes people sick. Horizontals, a bit better. But then, sort of refresh rate and latency and these things within the headsets are incredibly important. Resolution. So you can't take somebody on a roller coaster ride in VR when their body's stationary, but in their head they're actually riding on a roller coaster. That will make people sick, which is why at the Samsung place here in New York, they put you in haptic chairs that actually move with you, so your body feels whatever you're actually seeing in your head. So.
Yeah, your inner ear, right, is a huge aspect of what you do. I've had a thing where I was using a VR headset, and just the moment, maybe you ever see like a load screen where it's not totally in sync with where your head's moving because it's loading up, and just that little thing where the screen didn't follow with what my head was doing, it makes you immediately motion sickness. So yeah, haptics, meaning vibration or force feedback, if you guys aren't familiar, that corresponds with what you're seeing visually, is going to be, I think, a huge play into the future also.
Yeah, and from even the pre-production level, when we're talking about concepts, we've got to think about things like that. How are we going to create camera motion? Because I think a lot of what we see right now is static stuff. It's stuff on a tripod. It's stuff that's hard mounted. And there's a place for that. But if you really want to get that feeling of immersion and presence, we want to add some of those natural movements. And those are really challenging because your brain is or your eyes are detached from your body in this sense. And when you isolate those senses, it causes that, your brain to say, oh, something's wrong here. There's rejecting what I'm seeing. So the more of the sense inclusion you can get, the more that brain hacking that happens, and the closer you get to like true presence and really feeling as if, okay, I forgot I'm sitting in the chair. I mean, I did the Samsung roller coaster at South by, and there were a few moments in there climbing up, actually going up, where I forgot where I was, and I was on a roller coaster. Like that moment happened, and when you feel that, you realize how powerful presence really is in virtual reality or 360 video.
It's a whole new experience, really, and people need to get used to that sensation, I think. I think the closest example I can think of is you go to the amusement parks, and there are several rides out there over the world that they have the hydraulic system, where you're in the chair and they kind of simulate the feeling of you, while you're looking at a screen, of you diving downward or going upward. And I think that's the part that people need to simply experience in person. It's hard to explain that. You can't really explain that kind of sensation. So we actually have a video. Our trainers and sales staff have been test driving some VR stuff and 360 gear over at B&H, and we've now just opened a VR department within the store. So check this video out. We have a few samples of what's at the store.
360-degree filmmaking and VR technologies are new and exciting, but even the professionals need to get their feet wet. Our training staff has taken a variety of products and put them to the test in order to learn how they work and share that knowledge with you. They say that you need to see it to believe it. In the B&H store, we now have a fully featured selection of VR headsets where you can try one on. Relax, take a seat. VR is an experience like no other, and from the moment you put that headset on, you will be immersed. You can even view the space in 360 degrees. Choose your camera and view the result on an iPad in real time. The VR revolution is here, and this is just the beginning.
Welcome back, everybody. So for our next two chapters, they are brought to you by F-Stoppers. Thank you guys for making it possible. We're moving on to post-production in 360 and VR. For those of you who are editors, you know this is always fun to talk about. So VR editing, the creation of the content, like any new video format, we all know this. Every time something new comes out, we have to upgrade our computers. So in the clip right here, we can see that there are some system requirements. They're based off the Oculus system requirements, the baseline. But I think it's safe to say that if you are an editor already, if you're involved in post-production, you're probably largely set in terms of hardware. You kind of have, usually you have a high-end system. You have a lot of storage. So that really leaves us with software. What are kind of the hardware and software options that exist out there to create this material? How do the headsets play into creating the material?
So as far as software goes, we are using a lot of traditional tools like Premiere and After Effects for cutting. But there's also a lot of specialized tools out there on the market like Color's AutoPano Video, which is basically was created specifically for one task only, and that task is to stitch videos together to create a spherical projection. So as far as hardware goes, like you've mentioned, a lot of us, the editors, we already had that hardware. We might have needed to upgrade things here and there to accommodate VR. I know that a lot of the time that we work on VR, we master at 6 to 8K resolution, so that requires a little bit of juice. But other than that, it's a very similar setup to regular editing.
I want you to add to that, Doug, as well, but also
Sure.
Let's get into stitching too, because that's a huge part of it. Go on.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna quick thing on hardware. I don't know what your solutions are. We're on set a lot, in mobile DIT, digital management. It's really difficult. Like you mess up your digital file management, you're shooting multiple cameras, you're just in big trouble after the fact. So we built using drone backpacks. We built Mac Pro for our Mac Pro trash cans. We've actually found that on drone backpacks you can fit your Mac Pro, wireless keyboard, mouse, and hard drives into one backpack, and I carry that on where we fly, and then I check in a Pelican 1652 Acer 24-inch monitors that fly with us. So we have full 12-core Mac Pros that fly with us everywhere. It's really super easy if anybody chooses to do that down the road.
I love compact computer packages. It's
Yeah, it's awesome, right?
all right, so let's get to stitching though, because stitching is definitely like the biggest component of the post process.
It's the bane of many of our existences sitting up here.
I'm not surprised at all. We have, I mean, you're talking not just 1-2 cameras. You're talking anywhere from what 7 to, I know some rigs have like 10, 12 cameras.
Yeah.
What is that process like?
Yeah, 20. The new 360 Heroes 24 3D.
Oh, well, there you go. So.
Well, the process, I mean, it's an art form by itself, just like any other, post-production process. Stitching videos together is an art form. We use Freedom 360 rigs. All the Freedom 360 rigs have 6 cameras. This is enough to create, like I previously said, 6 to 8K resolution files. The reason we do it, we future-proof our content a little bit, because when we will get the technology where the screens will be better, all we have to do is we just have to remaster and re-export, re-encode into a 6K and 8K resolution file. Although 4K at the moment sounds like quite big, a lot of resolution, for VR it's actually not.
Yeah, because you're zooming into a small portion of a 4K file, so you have this 4K file.
Still aren't a lot of devices on VR that can even display that.
So what we also have to be considerate is that, a lot of people ask me, oh, well, how did you stitch that? I mean, there's stitching issues like parallax and like, proximity. And that's something, a lot of those things are simpler to do. They're not simple by any stretch of the imagination, but they're simpler to do if you shoot it properly. And that's something that I always advocate. You have to know what system you're shooting on. What's the system's limitations? Because every system that is currently on the market that's available to the consumer has some limitations. Some are bigger, some are less, but there's some limitations. So knowing what you're shooting with, knowing if your system can handle rolling shutter, if your system can handle fast-paced action, it's important. And that makes my post-production team and myself quite happy. But it does take a while, because now you have to also consider, before even stitching it, you have file management. You're dealing with so many files. There's a whole new system of file management, and if you mess up, even on the smallest thing is, file naming, and you named camera 2 camera 6, now you're going into this whole, you're going into a rabbit hole with trying to figure out what's what. On top of that, we have synchronization. If something is, because we have 6 different videos shot at the same exact time, what our job is to make sure that we create one video that's completely seamless. And so syncing footage is something that's of an issue. We have a lot of companies contacting us saying, hey, something happened, I made the clap. I clap because, we usually clap in regular, media, and there's nothing. There's no sync. So a lot of those issues that regular cinematographers don't really have. And I always, when I speak to clients, I speak to a lot of our friends and in the industry, I say that, in a way, you have to make the video before you make the video. And this is, it's a big challenge, and all by itself, it's an art form that we developed and we have an eye for. It's something that needs to be developed for quite some time.
And how many times have you had your software automatically audio sync all your cameras?
All the time.
Oh, all the time?
Yes. Yes. Well,
Okay.
because
Okay.
How is automation in regards to what's the state of software in regards to automating the stitching process? Can PJ, do you know anything about that?
It's for us. We like to take a pretty manual and hands-on approach to doing it.
I thought that would be the case.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, it goes back to this idea of standards too. We do shoot with lots of different rigs that we also build in-house. We have a team that will model stuff out, print it, we'll test it, and then we'll get a higher res print of it, and we'll put that into production. We'll use it, but by doing that, we've got this huge toy box of variants. So everything is going to have a different number of inputs. If we're going to capture ambisonic audio, now we're talking about capturing a minimum of 4 channels of audio on a separate device that also needs to be synced up as well. Right now, there are very few tools that's going to take all of those things and put them in one piece of software, and there's no magic button that does that. So there's a lot of touch that happens there, and because of that, we kind of created a term that we use. We call it deep edits. Once we get our sort of story edit done, and we kind of sort of semi-picture lock the story, but then we get into this thing that stands for devastatingly exhaustive editing procedures, and it really is. And it's become a thing that it's not a step that is in traditional film. So when somebody says, okay, great, you got the story edited, oh yeah, well, we have to go and fix all the parallax. We have to get rid of the tripods, and we have to do all that. And most of that is pretty manual, is pretty artistry related.
Ben, what can you add to the post-production?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in production, but I think what we see in content, we see the end result a lot. We spend a lot of time with producers, and there are a lot of simple things that we see that are often ignored. Sort of knowing where your stitch lines are going to be in the content that you're shooting, we are constantly frustrated that look, sometimes there's just going to be a stitch line. That stitch line could be a very subtle blur, but in your action, you've got a person running across that blur line, that stitch line. And there's oftentimes you can sort of get around that either in your story or in how you angled the camera. And so being able to sort of think through those things, knowing where your stitch lines are going to be, knowing where the action is going to occur in this is one of the things that we just are constantly trying to push people to think through. One of the other sort of biggest pet peeves we see, people are trying to bring sort of some old cinema or sort of some dramatic sort of techniques to VR, where you start with this black screen and the logo or the title right in front. And oftentimes with 360 video, especially on a mobile phone, you're sitting here like this with your phone, and given that it's using the gyroscope, the user is, and we see this all the time, they're looking at a black screen. They don't know why. But because the content creator thought it was dramatic to have this black screen with a logo right in front, the user is lost. They don't know where to actually look and where to see that, and so they end up hunting around or think they're just looking at a black screen. So there's a lot of techniques like that you need to sort of throw out when you're dealing with consumers looking at 360 video on a number of different devices.
Is it possible that maybe sometime down the line there could be a system that tries to either urge the viewer to reorient themselves, or?
So, I mean, at Little Star, we're working on things like, what we call director's cuts, and the ability for a director to be able to specify at any given point along the timeline where the user should be looking, because we do see this less so in headset experiences in terms of getting lost.
That makes sense.
But on mobile phones, on the web, it's very easy for consumers to get lost, miss the action. And so to be able to sort of go into a director's cut mode and be able to sort of reorient the user, you have to be careful about that stuff too, especially when you're in a headset that's going to make somebody sick. So there's different techniques that we're experimenting with at Little Star as a distribution platform to make that easier.
There's also something that's called force perspective, and this is where we back up our videos with a little bit of software. And what that does, that creates, it takes a little bit of the freedom away, but from the viewer, but for a very short period of time. And that short period of time is where we initiate a force perspective, where we direct the camera in a way and we tell them, hey, this is the place to look at right now. This is where the action is happening. This is the most exciting moment of the video. So there's definitely quite a lot of ways to do that.
And I think something we haven't covered, which we talked about before we started filming, was a new directing style.
Yes.
Which I think is such an important thing to cover. So we can talk about the technical style, which is, I mean, obvious. It's amazing to have these tools, right? But, brands, again, educating brands, educating what people want to see. you have to use these brand new tools to be an effective new kind of director. Now you can use, spatial audio, a spooky sound on your left ear to bring you over here. You can have an object or a car driving across screen. You're like, what is that? And it'll lead you to somebody walking up over here. But actually having to think more so right here, like how you don't necessarily have to force people, like Ben was saying, to look behind. But you almost forget when you come from the 2D world that there's so many things you can do to make use of this wonderful world we have. And how are you going to bring people without literally drawing an arrow or flashing a light or whatever, by just using a natural, good, solid storyline and drawing attention with these inherent little tools, these little subtle tools to bring them out.
What we like to do with our videos is we like to create them in pre-pro in a way that there's not only one story. There's a few stories to be seen and to be told. So, because we haven't touched on it, but 360 video, the appeal of 360 video in VR is, especially for brands and clients, which we work a lot with, is the replayability and rewatchability of that medium. In traditional media, for advertisement, you have 30 seconds at most to capture your audience and capture the attention of your client or potential client or whatever, right? But in 360 video, we almost quadrupled that amount of time that you capture your potential audience,
and
right?
We see that in the data where people are replaying this content more because there's this fear of missing out. There's this fear that they miss some action in the video because there's just so much more content to look at.
Yeah, it's adaptability to the format, and that's something that will take a while, just like any other new format that's been introduced over the years.
I was just going to say, along those lines, from a marketing and a commercial standpoint, we think a lot about how we can make these things more evergreen, and that speaks a lot to what you guys are just mentioning. How do we reinvent the story, or how do we stack onto that story in a way that gamifies it a little bit, makes you want to come back and explore, and keep the content evergreen? Because from a marketing standpoint, no content is more valuable than content that can be reused and reinvented. So how do you break it down in more digestible pieces? How do you make it snackable? How do you gamify it? How do you put it in an experience that lets the consumer feel as if they are in the driver's seat, even if they are not 100% driving the car, they're there. So it's these little techniques that we think about even on the concept phase, to make sure that when we shoot it and we create these little bits, they can be really valuable on a longer timeline than just we're going to push this out and activate it at a conference or at a one-day event. We want this stuff to have a life and be able to kind of live on its own and continue to grow.
Yeah, and from a director standpoint, your regular director would when they're directing action only at one point of the video. What we do is, as a new age directors of VR, we are not afraid, and we shouldn't be afraid to direct action at not only at one point, but everywhere. We shouldn't be afraid for action to happen everywhere, because that's what keep the viewer coming back and looking, hey, I missed this story right there. Now let me check what was happening in the back or elsewhere.
Let's bring it back though a little bit, because I want to address a little bit about the actual camera spacing within that. Back to the stitching conversation. We're going to jump back into that conversation, but I do want to address, do various rigs, I'm sure you can answer this as well, do various rigs offer different advantages in terms of that later on in post-production, because the spacing of the cameras would be different? And how is that also, I guess, how can it go wrong?
Well, and it comes back to what I said before about knowing your rig and the capabilities of the rig and what the rig can or cannot do. So a lot of people are under the assumption that if it's a 360 camera, just put it in the middle of the room and record everything for you. You shouldn't worry about anything. But there is such a thing that's called framing. And that's something that we still use, and it still applies for 360 media. If we know for a fact that we have a subject matter that's going to go from point A to point B right here, we connect the monitor to one of our cameras and make sure and rehearse and make sure that the action that's going to happen is going to happen within, for example, one camera at all times. So we know for a fact that our talent and most likely what the person is going to look at will be in one shot. There's not going to have no stitching errors. There's not going to have no parallax. And because all of these little things, they cancel out what we as VR filmmakers are trying to do, and we're trying to create a sense of immersion. And as soon as something happens in that video that throws you off of the immersion, whether it's a tripod that wasn't masked out, which we see unfortunately a lot in 360 videos, all of these little components, when they're removed, you're immersed. When they're not removed and they're not taken care of, that's where a lot of the immersiveness and the presence of the piece
and
really
it
goes away.
And you're right, and made me think. It's really important to treat it like a stage play.
Exactly.
I mean, like you kind of create cues, especially you're doing like a narrative type piece. You treat it like a play. So the person's there and they want to watch a show, and you curate what's going on, and so they may you train your actors and or speaker to walk to like stationary cues, so they don't walk correct. Like you don't want them walking in between the camera angle where you're stitching it together, or they'll look like that.
I mean, it's fixable, but it just takes much more time. And if you're in the business of VR and you're actually making money with VR, which is entirely possible nowadays, you have to always think about the amount of time that's spent in post versus what what the budget of the product
so much
is,
time in
because
post.
you can be in VR fixing things to infinity.
We just saw the video right before that had stitching errors. You could see people painting it out. How often do you have to do that? Is it every video you have to always paint out?
At some levels, I would say there is always something that needs to be painted out. We have to approach it in a very clever way, because if we paint something out on one frame, that paint might not work for another frame. So, and then if you have people passing by and you just have paint, they're going to disappear all of a sudden.
Of course.
Never mind when you start getting into stereoscopic.
Twice the work.
It's a whole nother.
Yeah, but definitely keyframing, rotoscoping, and using Nuke and 360 projection is like a whole new world that I've just coming from a 2D world and moving into this. It's like, oh my god, it's a whole different thing. So yeah, definitely paint outs and rotoscoping is like the new it's life essentially. Yeah, painting out is life.
All right, so we should probably move on. I want to get to the future of VR. So what can we look forward to? I guess both post-production, production, platform-wise, in the next 12 months and beyond. What is there to be excited about? What's coming? Because I know this is, I don't want to say it's the beginning, but it is. It is the beginning.
It is the beginning.
So what can we expect?
I think for us and our company, really we see the future, at least what we do, is game engine type stuff. Game engine, Unreal Engine, 3D rendered interactivity. Bringing true experiences where we're creating what's most exciting. Everybody, I think, listening can appreciate. It's like the holodeck, the Star Trek holodeck. You're walking in, and you have products like the HTC Vive, for example, where you're going to be able to walk and kneel and crouch and have a really truly interactive experience. And something really important to us is immersive social media in the gaming space, like actually interacting with a friend from across the world, whether it's their little avatar or a 3D scanned person, but interaction from across the world is going to be fantastic, and it is happening.
I think we are going to see interactive for sure. But let's just start from PJ, go back down. We'll revisit at the end.
So for us at UVisit, I think one of the things that we're really excited about is combining our live action content with volumetric 3D objects to create more of those gamified and snackable experiences. So stuff that has that combination of what we feel is really important to VR, and feeling real presence is using real content that exists, and combining that with some other elements to really break the threshold a little bit and get you there a little bit more. As far as the kind of hardware and things for the future, for me, it's like haptics and headsets. Like I want more and better and higher resolution, higher capacity to do all of that stuff, which is going to get us a lot closer to the content and the concepts there.
And I think laser projection is going to be really big also. There's a couple brands that are actually doing, separate from Magic Leap and augmented reality, that are actually doing laser projection onto your retinas, which I think is going to be very big. You know, you can get really, it's not scary, you're not going to go blind, but I think that's going to be a very big thing for the future. And like you said, haptics are going to be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, so at Little Star, we're pretty excited about, again, more headsets, better headsets. These headsets actually getting into the market. Oculus just started shipping. HTC just started shipping the Gear VR, so the consumer launch happened in the fall. We're particularly excited about the Sony PlayStation VR in October. You know, that'll be very plug and play with the PlayStation 4. Sony knows how to make hardware. They know how to ship it. They know how to create a consumer experience around it. Little Star will be, you know, an active, you know, sort of launch title with the PlayStation VR, which we're excited about. So the ability to distribute content on a device like that can reach a larger consumer base than what we're seeing, I think, with the Rift and the Vive is particularly exciting. We're also really excited about game engine content, so I'm being able to distribute actual executables, not just, you know, stream MP4s. You know, we're working a lot on that, so to be able to sort of launch interactive experiences, stuff that's been built in a game engine, perhaps shot with live action, but brought into a game engine to create interactivity or volumetric capture and objects inside with layers. And I think the last, you know, we're not the last certainly, but, you know, one of the other things we're excited about, and Alex talked about this, was money. You know, we have to figure out how to, you know, create a real industry around this, not just in production. We're seeing a lot of content get funded with, you know, sponsorship. You know, Discovery Channel does a piece brought to you by Gillette. You know, things like that, where Gillette is paying largely for the production. We'll continue to see a lot of that, but, you know, getting some sort of consumer-facing monetization model around ads, paid content, subscription, enabling content creators to monetize their content is something that we're particularly excited about in the next 12 months.
Well, we're at Concept VR, you know, largely based on live action VR production. I mean, the main thing always been and always will be is to be able to push the limits of what we can do in VR. As far as storytelling and, you know, and everything around it. On top of that, I'm also proud to say that we're working with a lot of the leading softwares currently on the market. We're working with the Foundry, working with Imagineer System, Mocha, and what we are trying to do is we're trying to help them as well to help us, kind of help me, help you situation, where we can provide them footage. We can tell them, hey, here's real problems in VR, problems that happen on location. This is something that we need to fix. You have the knowledge, create tools for us, because tools are very important. Post-production tools are very important to the integrity of these VR videos in the future. A lot of directors at the moment are afraid to move the camera because there is no tools to, you know, to adjust for the movement and, you know, fix everything. So they just simply check that off their shot list, which is it's unfortunate because the creativity and the space that we are given in the 360 VR experience kind of goes to waste a little bit. And the reason for it is because we have some limitations. A lot of them have to do with software. So you know, we're always focusing on how to make this better, not only for ourselves but also for the community, because for this medium to succeed and be great, it's already great, but for it to succeed we need a lot of good quality content and content that other content creators can produce without being afraid to move the camera, without being afraid to experiment.
One more thing on the content side and the creation side, that, you know, a lot of the footage we saw early on was this sort of fly on the wall type experience where you feel like you're a ghost in the room and there's all this action happening around you and you might actually be sitting in a chair but nobody's interacting with you. So a lot of the content that we're starting to see, you know, when you're fully immersed in a VR headset, really makes you feel like you're there, and the actors in the room or the actors that's part of the scene are actually interacting with you, looking you in your eye, talking to you. And so there's this true feeling of immersion and not just like you're a ghost in the room. So when you're creating content for this, there's that, you know, keep that in mind as you start, you know, thinking creatively about it.
Well, then it really comes down to content being king, as always. So I think we'll get there, though. We will get to that interactive moment. So, well, that concludes the normal part. Let's move on to questions, the part that everybody's been waiting for. So the first question I have is, I want to be on the front line of VR, but with the limitations of affordable yet good quality cameras, where should I start?
I can
Freedom
answer
360.
that. Well, thank you.
Let's
Well,
try to make it a little
there is quite a lot of cameras out there at the moment where people can start experimenting with. A great camera is the Ricoh Theta. It's very simple. It's a camera that literally, if you want to press one button, that's the camera for you. We also, and then, people that buy it should not be afraid to buy it, because not we as a professional production agency, we use it for previs. So when we do location scouting and when we try to visualize what will happen and how the VR space will look like, we pull it out of our pockets, we click, and we look around and we see what we are working with. So cameras like these are available to the market, to the public. You can go out, you can shoot, don't sell that content, shoot it for yourself, experiment, and then go and buy a Freedom 360 rig and shoot good quality content.
Yeah, it's about just going out and doing it first. It's kind of like the conversation when you're trying to explain VR to somebody for the first time. It's like, you don't explain it, you experience it. And it's a lot when it comes to creating the content too. You learn by getting a Theta or any of the consumer products that are out there and doing it and trying it and seeing what happens when a subject is 3 feet from you, 10 feet from you, see what a really wide landscape type scene looks like. And then you start to learn, and that's when you can sort of elevate your game and continue to, stack on top of that.
Yeah, and another thing that I wanted to mention that, it's good that you mentioned it, is how close you shoot your subject, because we see the subject in a certain distance on the monitor, but as soon as you get into VR, that subject is actually much closer to you, and that could really take the level of comfort from the viewer. So you always have to be mindful of how close the subject matter to the shot to make it interesting, engaging, but at the same time not awkward or not uncomfortable.
I can see you wanted to add a little something.
I was going to say, I mean, on the heels of what PJ was saying, is go out and create, and it's not just to sort of echo that, but Discovery Channel, really kind of in a lot of ways led the way in that, last summer, last spring, they just started creating content. Discovery Channel has an enormous brand. They have a significant interest in quality. And maintaining that. But with VR, they knew they just had to go start experimenting and not just keeping that stuff behind closed doors to see, what they thought of it, but actually get it into consumers' hands and start seeing how that reacted, how people reacted to it. Did they like it? What was their reaction to it? Did it make people sick, et cetera? So just get out there and experiment. And some of the biggest brands in the world are doing exactly that.
Great. So on the next question, what are the best ways to move the camera for VR? Who wants?
Slowly. Slowly and minimally. I personally, from our experience, feel like forward and back motion is really forward motion is really the only thing right now at a 60 frame per second kind of video that's not going to make people immediately violently nauseated. But yeah, so subtle movement.
And we agreed. And if we do, we've been implementing use of drone, but I will say I only use a couple drone ops that are very good and have very strong. Wind is a huge factor because you can't just stabilize your camera. You have to have not only a drone that's strong enough to handle heavy weights and wind, but a really good op that won't like mess around. But you can get a great camera operator that can hover a camera, 6 feet off the ground and make it look very seamless, and you can comp out the rotors above. But it's its own art in itself. But drone I think is really cool. I think there's some RC systems that have stabilization. What DJI makes the really good RC system. But again, you have to be very slow, very subtle. Don't break the horizon line. Just go really ease into it.
Acceleration and deceleration are things that make nausea. So when you speed up and slow down at a high rate, it's really hard for your eyes to talk to your brain to tell your body this is okay. So you really do need to be incredibly critical about those movements. I agree too. We've flown a bit of drone content. I've done it myself too, and that seems to be a really good way to create some stability. And you do need a good drone up.
Also, the biggest problem that we face when moving the camera is something that I mentioned before, is that if you see the camera sees you. Mm-hmm. You're in the shot. So you have to approach camera movements also subtly, but at the same time you have to approach them in a very creative way. So what we created, coming back to our conversation, what we created on Freedom 360 out of necessity is the Freedom 360 Explorer. And we use parallax, actually, as funny as it sounds, to our advantage, because we have a line, a tube going inside from one parallax point to another, and we can hook up a line, just a wire cam, and have it go from point A to point B without ever seeing the line ever, because it's being stitched out. So getting very creative is really what you have to do, and also you have to justify your camera movement. Camera movement is something that's very hard to digest for a lot of people in VR. So when you move the camera, you really have to justify why.
The same could even be said for two-dimensional. A lot of people have to justify, say, a dolly move or a slider move. I do find it interesting, though, that you are essentially exploiting the parallax point.
Yes. It's our enemy, but it's our friend as well sometimes.
So that kind of brings us to the third question, though, which is, and I have a feeling I know the answer, but are 6 lenses really better than 2 when it comes to 360 videos? Now, before we get into that, I've actually wondered the same, because I understand there's more picture information, but are you also dealing with fewer stitch points?
Absolutely. 2 lenses will definitely give you a much easier stitch. As opposed, because you're not dealing with so many stitch issues. But when you deal with commercial content, and sometimes content that you have only once in a lifetime opportunity to shoot, and that's something we did with the rocket launch, you want to be able to future-proof your content, to be able to showcase it and show it later at the resolution that this content deserves. Having 6 lenses and 6 cameras, granted, it's a much harder job, but at the same time, you preserve more information and you future-proof your content. And when we talk about rewatchability and being able to watch these videos on all kinds of devices, while a 2-camera system might look good on a screen, as soon as you put it in VR, we have the zoom value, and that zoom value will really show the difference between a 2-camera system and a 6-camera system.
And I think the key factor with understanding how to use camera systems today is the closer the camera is, or the camera lenses are to each other, the easier time you're going to have with filming. I mean, ultimately, if your cameras are like this, obviously, let's just imagine here, you're not shooting VR, and I have a camera shooting this, and I have a camera next to it over here shooting that. Obviously, my perspective of the camera filming us, I'm going to see the left side of the camera over here, and I'm literally going to see the right side of the camera over here. How's that going to stitch together? So having a nice system where the lenses are nice and compact together, whether it's 2 or 6 or 10, whatever you so choose, key is keeping the cameras and lenses really close to each other.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a trade-off there too, because if we're shooting with a camera that has 2 lenses, in order to capture a full sphere, those lenses need to be incredibly wide, right? And so if you've ever shot with a fisheye before, I come from a photo background, I love my fisheye, but stuff that's at the perimeter of those lenses, they suffer from barrel distortion. You get all sorts of anomalies that can happen because your image is getting stretched and distorted. And so if you're shooting with 2 lenses, 2 cameras, both of those cameras are going to overlap in places where there could potentially be some issues with barrel distortion. You go with a more standard, a narrow field of view, you obviously need more cameras, so now you're dealing with more stitch lines. So there's a trade-off, and going back to what we discussed, way early on talking about cameras, you got to know your tools. And there is the right tool for every job, and you just need to know when you need to reach in your tool belt and get a different one for that job.
And I personally believe the best camera system is one with narrow, which made me think exactly right. The wide angle versus the narrow, like a narrow field of view lens, but a lot more lenses. That's actually the best way to defeat parallax. But we don't have the data stream and the power and whatever to have a lot of rigs out there that have 30 lenses, 40 lenses, with the medium focal length all put together that are going to run that much data and that much power. But that's the truth. If you want the perfect VR camera, the be all end all, it'll be about the size of a softball, and it'll have 40 lenses pointed in every direction, and they'll have a mid focal length versus super wide angle. And there you go, your stitching issues are solved. But it'll happen one day, I think.
Anything you'd like to add? Or?
No. I mean, I think most of the content that we've seen on our platform has come from at least 6 camera rigs. I think we get user-generated content on our platform. It comes from Rico Thetas and such, but it's not stuff that we really care to promote or put out there. So, Facebook launched an open-sourced their camera rig, which will cost you $30,000 if you want to piece it together, and it's a 16 camera rig or 17.
Is there a point of diminishing returns, perhaps? Are we gonna have 60 to 100 camera rigs at some point in the future?
There are people that I can't. You may know who the people I'm talking about. There are some filmmakers in the 360 space that may or may not be using a 70 or 80 camera rig system. I don't have definitive proof or gonna name any names, and they put out great stuff. But it's like there's limitations with building a camera like that. You can't put it inside a car. You can't go in tight spaces. A lot of what we shoot are in very tight environments, so I can't use a huge red-based rig or. Again, know your
Attaching
tools.
it to drone.
Right,
It gets excessive.
Exactly. Know your tools for where your platform.
Yeah.
And also, if if you're trying to make a business out of this, right, which we eventually, working with commercial clients, we do. The more cameras you have, the more data you have to store, the
Of
more
course.
data you have to work with, the longer it takes to stitch that stuff. So it's
gets
a trade-off.
overwhelming.
Yes, it
Gets
gets
overwhelming.
and it's a trade-off that you need to make in order to be able to be profitable as well.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to number 4, I believe. Okay, so this is a very interesting one. So we have a disabled vet who's paralyzed below the shoulders. VR may help me feel mobile again. Can you suggest a Mac or other VR system best suited for me? I guess they mean computer system or complete VR system. Do any of you have experience or maybe knowledge of how that experience could play out for somebody that's disabled?
Well, so Mac, so the Oculus Rift, they're no longer supporting any Mac system,
Yeah.
so you need a PC-based system. It's Windows 10 or Windows 7. So if you're going to go with a tethered headset, I'd personally maybe wait until October for the Sony PlayStation VR, just because it'll be easy to set up. But if you're pretty savvy with systems, the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift are fantastic. The Samsung Gear VR is a free device they'll ship with an S7. So if you have a Samsung phone, S7 or S6, you can get that for $99 if you already have the phone, which obviously creates it's a very immersive device that with the right content can certainly make you feel mobile again.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the PlayStation device, the PlayStation system, I think is going to be really exciting for a lot of people. People that already have a really incredibly powerful gaming system on their shelves. I have one at home, and for a few $100, they're going to have a pretty cool with a VR headset with a bunch of interactive things they can play with their friends. Or, I'm excited for, I think it's Gran Turismo Online. I'm going to be playing my buddies online, race cars from across the network. And I think something like that where, you're worried about, the Oculus won't work on your PC and that sort of thing. I think, in the next few months, you could start with the Samsung Gear or the Zeiss. The Zeiss, they sell at B&H, plug. But the Zeiss, and there's different headsets where you can use your pre-existing phone. But, give it a few months, and there's going to be really cool stuff that'll work on, I presume, your gaming systems that you can just plug in and play and enjoy.
And for really cheap devices, Google Cardboard-like devices, there's the Mattel ViewMaster, which you can slide your iPhone into. There's the Merge VR headset, which is a phone-based headset, lets you strap in. So, those are some cheap alternatives now.
So I suppose it really could come down to what is the easiest, most convenient option to get started in. And we're probably heading towards the more convenient end, I imagine, as we go on. Number 5, what software is recommended by the panel for stitching the 6-camera GoPro rigs? I guess we can extend that question just a little bit to...
Sure. So there's a few softwares at the moment that are specialized for stitching any amount of cameras together. One of them, as I mentioned before, is the Color Autopano Video. The other one is the Video Stitch. And the third one that we're currently working with is Nuke's plugin it used to be called Ocula VR. They renamed it to Cara. And I can attest myself because I've been using it for quite some time. It's a very powerful tool. It's a tool that gives us a lot of freedom, a lot of options that we can, what we can create with, and we're using Nuke's abilities and Nuke's algorithms and Nuke's everything to be able to stitch our footage in the best possible way. So
Gives you the most flexibility with it.
absolutely.
No, you go ahead.
You know, I guess it really does depend on your sort of level of expertise and how much you really want to get into. Because if we're talking about a nuke solution, agreed, incredibly powerful tool set that you have there, but also a much more high-end type system.
curve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a huge learning curve
Starting
there.
person may be a little tough.
Yeah, so you know there are options. Again, there's trade-offs. Yeah, what do you want your end result? What are you looking to do? How much really heavy edit do you need to do? Or are we looking for just a pure stitch? And you can kind of work your solutions. We've used all three of them. We use them all regularly, but they're not the only tools we use too. Convert stuff to image sequences and bring it into PTGUI and bring it in and do lots of other stuff, depending upon what your situation is. So. It goes back to the toolbox. Like know the tools, and that'll help.
I think, great point also, but I think my personal opinion, color is a great place to start.
Yeah,
you want to, I think you can download a free demo to try it out.
Yes, you can.
There's a bunch of really awesome tutorials on YouTube. It's pretty easy. Video Stitch is a great program. I think maybe they fixed it since then. They had a little trouble dealing with Mac video cards, my opinion.
Yes, I think at the moment they only support NVIDIA cards.
And
correct.
there's not a lot of that offered on a lot of Mac platforms.
Especially the new Mac.
So Video Stitch is a nice program, but yeah, there's a little. If you're running a Mac, they may have a little trouble with that. Color, which was just purchased a year ago by GoPro. Almost said Google. Sorry, GoPro. They're nice and easy program. Not too bad of a learning curve. And like you were saying before, it's like an art. There's no proper way to just mask your own style or stitch a certain way and all these things. It takes a little bit of practice, and like you were saying before, get out in the field. Just like shooting, in 360, your editing in 360 is going to take a lot of practice. That's why you were saying before, shoot, practice your post. It's very frustrating at first, no matter how many tutorials you watch, because you'll notice every time you do shoot, little nuances of ways you can do things better. So
always, every single time we do something, we come back to the office and we're like, hey, we can do this now, and hey, how come we didn't think about that? So, for example, a lot of people ask, "Whoa, this is a perfect stitch. How did you stitch so perfectly?" Well, there's no such thing as perfect stitch.
It looks perfect.
It looks good because there's a lot of work that's put into that perfect stitch. We also have to realize that because we have two lenses. If in a 6-camera array, we have two lenses that are looking at the same exact thing, but because they're looking at the same exact thing from two different perspectives, what you get parallax. This is what we call parallax. So in a parallax, in a mathematical, very geometric way, if you stitch something that's close by, your background is going to break. If you stitch for your background, the subject that's closer to you will break. So finding the trade-off, doing something that we do at the moment, we call adaptive stitching, which we go through the shot, we make sure that we stitch, there's not one stitch that applies to your whole video. Is certain states of stitches that have to be put in place, and then plates that need to be, ported to After Effects or Nuke or everything. A lot of compositing, a lot of keyframing, and just a lot of elbow grease, really.
And look, for as much frustration as you get out of sometimes being in that deep edit phase, you also get that equal in returns of accomplishment when you see how much work and how much you've learned out of that, and you're able to, create a beautifully clean 360 plate. There's a lot of pride you get from that too. And I think for me personally, coming from photo and traditional video background, learning this, that's been some of the most exciting stuff that we've done. Is I figured it out. Eureka! You have those eureka moments every day, and there's not a lot of industries where you can have that on a daily basis and share that with other people who are doing the same thing or in the trenches trying to figure the same stuff out. So, don't use that as a deterrent. Use that as a motivator. They're the same thing.
I just like freaking my family out, making something and making them try it. It's the best part.
All right. We have time for 2 more questions, so sorry to cut you. How will the VR experience be for those with sight in only one eye?
I've tried it. I closed one eye when I was in it. I've looked up online sort of what it's like for people with one eye or had eye surgery or something like that. Naturally, look, it's still immersive. You're only seeing out of one eye, but when you're completely immersed and covered, it's still pretty impressive from what I experienced myself and from what I've heard from others. Certainly stereo or sort of 3D content you need both eyes for. And so I didn't actually experiment with that, but from what I've heard, it's a very sort of jarring experience and they can't really sort of experience the proper 3D, because you just naturally need both eyes for that.
What's interesting to me, and that's something that I personally will probably follow up with, is I would like to put it on a person, put Gear VR, our experience, on a person that actually has one eye, because people that have a sight on one eye, they perceive world differently from what we do. You know, we are used to seeing the world with two eyes in 3D, and when we close an eye, that's weird to us, but it's not weird to them. It's absolutely natural to them. So it would be something that's quite interesting, and I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna follow up with you guys and see how that works.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, we actually did run into this exact scenario at an expo. I think it was South by. We had a guy who came up and said, "Look, I'm like 80% blind in one eye, and when I go see a 3D movie, I last about 30 seconds, and I can't handle it. Like, what's going to happen? Give me your best 3D piece." And I was like, "Well, if you only see half the image, it's not going to be 3D, but it's also not going to make you nauseous." And so, you know, he did try it, and while he still had some vision there, he said it was a considerably better experience in an immersed environment like that than it was watching a 3D movie on a big screen, which was really interesting.
3D content,
we did.
Or was it just 2D
we did.
content?
We showed him both, actually. Yeah, it was really interesting.
The 2D content was better for him.
It was definitely better for him.
Okay,
Yeah,
the
2D
content he couldn't.
There was no 3D information for him.
Depth information with one eye.
But it was really interesting because he basically was like, "I'm challenging you. Like, don't make me nauseous." So it's like, okay.
All right. Well, one question left. Would love to hear techniques on getting the sharpest picture and best exposure using GoPro cameras. These are obviously very popular cameras for 360, so I think this is probably a very common answer for some people. They probably want to know.
Do you? I'm sure we all have our perspectives, but you know, they have I shoot digital as a still background photographer. I shoot digital medium format. You always appreciate dynamic range. GoPros are great for a lot of things. Dynamic range is not one of them. So we shoot a lot of car stuff. So you're shooting in a dark car interior. It's very easy that you may have an evenly exposed person driving, but the whole the window next to them is all blown out. It's usually, funny enough, in a car. If I'm facing in the passenger seat, this is good exposure. But you start going from about your 10 o'clock all the way to about your 6, it blows out the windows just because you're facing dark objects. So we usually plan out our shot. And if you're usually like exposures are in my opinion, one of your biggest things you're going to face, challenge-wise, exposure and detail-wise, is we plan out our shot and then we use a monitor to pre-check those frames just to see how it'll look. We have from just experience, we'll know if like the sun's setting, we're going to have exposure issues with like being too dark because of the sun. So yeah, just you can bring a little handheld monitor or use the GoPro app on your mobile device, but just pre-check and be aware that you're not going to blow out any information or deal with any like huge exposure issues. I'm sure you have a lot more experience as well.
Well, my only advice for exposure would be, coming from traditional media, I was also doing a lot of photography. Underexpose a little bit because we have more information in our shadows that we have in our highlights. So underexposing a little bit, what we have one of the GoPros that have the back on them. So we face it directly where the shot will be, and then on the GoPros we have an exposure compensation meter. So taking it on a -1 or a -1.5, underexposing a little bit will definitely give you much more options in post-production to find a little bit more detail in your shadows. For car situations, we would basically do a 2-pass system where we would expose the shot for the interior, then do a completely different stitch.
The plate.
For the outside, and then compose them together. So there's a lot of, like I said, in our medium right now, because we don't have a lot of tools and the cameras are not ideal, we have to get creative. As far as sharpness goes, there's a lot of great sharpening tools out there. The new sharpening tool in Premiere in Lumetri Colors does a great job for us. Metal Skybox has a sharpening tool. We use it a lot. It's also very important to understand that you are not shooting on a lossless format, right? So you can push your exposure and your sharpness to a certain point. If you push it too much, it becomes very obvious, and in a way, ruins the
Just
whole
like a
thing.
photo, I guess. Yeah, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And don't be afraid to play around with the Pro Tune settings. There are actual settings on a GoPro that you can play with and you can work with a little bit to work in your benefit. And you don't really know until you get familiar with it and you try it in some of those scenarios. You have a little bit of control there. It's not a red, but it's something that you actually can manipulate to some degree.
But this is a great question. I ultimately just don't go out there and just plop it on and just hope it's going to work in auto mode, because that unfortunately doesn't work in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a common camera. And I know a lot of the rigs that we saw covered GoPros. A lot of people are using GoPros, so it makes sense. I mean, I think it's a fair question to ask. But that is all we have, unfortunately. So thank you, everyone. I have learned a lot, and I know our online audience has been very curious. Everybody's really curious about VR and 360 video. Remember, viewers, if you've been watching online, please use the hashtag BHPhotoLive. If we didn't get to your question here, I apologize. We will be answering online. The B&H team will be taking all your questions. So thank you for watching. Until next time.
Thank you.